Dismissive avoidants don't usually intend to show behaviors of disrespect in a relationship, but sometimes their coping strategies definitely come off that way and can make other people feel that way. So in today's video, I wanted to shed some light on this topic, so that dismissive avoidant attachment styles have the ability to notice some of these patterns and themes and how they may be received by others when it may not be something that they're consciously aware of, and B, to validate what it feels like if you're on the other end of this, because I think it's really important to notice what's really going on and to understand it so that we don't take it to heart. We're going to cover some major behaviors that often come across as disrespectful, even if dismissive avoidants don't intend for this. We'll actually talk about how this affects the brain of people on the receiving end of this from a neuroscience perspective. And then we'll cover, most importantly, what you can do to heal, what you can do to address this in a relationship, to show up, to make sure that you're having healthy boundaries, etc. So let's start with the first behavior. The first behavior that can be so difficult to be on the receiving end of is stonewalling. Now, if you aren't familiar with what this is, stonewalling is essentially shutting down in a conflict, and it can feel like somebody is abandoning you when this happens. Now, if this creates a really strong heightened sense of being abandoned, they could also be tying into some of your own abandonment wounds. But essentially, shutting down and just icing somebody out not only is often counterproductive in a relationship dynamic when it comes to moving through an issue and healing beyond it and growing together through whatever conflict may arise, but also it can be sort of seen and felt as something disrespectful, because oftentimes that abrupt closing down doesn't take somebody else into consideration when they're on the receiving end of it. The dismissive avoidance relationship to this first behavior is usually one of them going into self-protection or self-preservation. They usually feel really overstimulated when it comes to conflict. They usually don't feel like they know how to move through conflict effectively. So they're not intending disrespect, but they're shutting down, they're coping by doing that, and often it's really difficult for the person on that receiving end. Number two, minimizing somebody else's needs. Something that's really important here is that dismissive avoidance may dismiss your emotional needs as being too much. And there is a variety of things at play here. I think it's really important to note that in healthy interdependent relationships, we have the ability as securely attached people to meet our own needs and do that as a mechanism of self-soothing, but also to lean on other people to get our needs met. So it's not one or the other. Now, something that's unique for dismissive avoidance is they are what we call counter-dependent. They usually are trying to literally not really meet many of their partner's needs. They tend to believe subconsciously that each person is responsible for their own needs almost exclusively. And this is because that is how they were conditioned. That's literally how they were brought up. It's like their relationship training taught them that you're just supposed to be responsible for your needs. And so when they feel like somebody else is making them responsible for their own needs, they feel like, wait, why are you giving your needs to me? That's yours. And so they may dismiss the needs, they may put them down. And the reality is that that's actually incorrect. If somebody's putting all of their needs onto somebody, that's codependent, the opposite of counterdependence. And in that case, that's unhealthy, right? If somebody's thinking you should just meet all of my needs and I should meet all of yours and we'll never meet our own or have a vast array of places that we can get our needs met through friends, through family, through hobbies, through career goals. Like if it's just all on one person in the relationship, that's codependency and that's unhealthy too. But a lot of times dismissive avoidants think that everybody should be counter-dependent because that's the programming they're moving through. And a lot of times as well, because dismissive avoidants are pretty good at suppressing their emotions and reactions, they often assume, and this is, as somebody who worked with, hundreds, if not thousands of dismissive avoidants over the years, a lot of dismissive avoidants would assume, and not meaning to, but they would think, well, I'm the one that's not really emotional in the relationship, so I'm the more stable one, so I must be securely attached. They would often think that, and thus, through that framework of thinking that they were the more secure one, they would then have, in their own eyes, more authority to make somebody else's emotional needs too much. They would think this is too much, and you can tell they're too much because they have these, sort of emotional outbursts, but they wouldn't realize a lot of the time that they were co-contributing to those emotional outbursts. Because if you're counter-dependent and somebody's codependent, really we want interdependence and we want both. But if somebody is already polarized one way, it actually polarizes the other person even more in the opposite direction. Now that's vice versa. So that's also that the more codependent somebody is, the more counter-dependent their partner is likely to be in a relationship. But I think it's important to note these things. Okay. So this behavior that often feels quite disrespectful is this minimizing of needs, where if your needs are dismissed and not heard out or communicated about, it can feel really painful. If you want to do a deeper dive into healing your attachment style, really becoming secure so you can show up in really secure ways in your relationships, but most importantly, become secure in the relationship to yourself, for 7 days, fully for free, you get to check out our attachment healing bootcamp. So it's these 6 pillars to rewiring your attachment style, leveraging neuroscience and rewiring and conditioning of your subconscious mind. It's extremely effective. You'll really see a lot of momentum throughout that 90 days. And as a gift for that program, just for a limited time, if you sign up now, we actually are giving away the attachment styles and intimacy course for free. So all about attachment styles and sex, intimacy, and our bootcamp covers really a few major things. Number one, rewiring of your triggers and wounds, okay, which makes relationships so much easier. It makes your life easier. Learning your roadmap to your needs and what you need in relationships as a whole. So if you are in a relationship, it helps you with understanding yours and your partner's. If you're out of a relationship, it helps you just really understand yours and know what questions to ask for future relationships or friendships or anything. How to somatically process emotions and regulate your nervous system so you become a master self-soother. How to actually show up and have healthy boundaries and not just intellectualize, but actually the practice and wiring into your body, your subconscious mind to do this so it becomes automatic. And then we talk about rewiring your communication patterns so you can crush your communication, really get seen and heard in relationships, and how to upgrade your behaviors, rewire unhealthy behaviors like clinging or stonewalling. We can really dive into that. It all is about the subconscious mind in the process, and you get that free course for life at the same time. And you can check it out for free for 7 days. If you don't like it, you can cancel anytime and you're never charged a thing. So number 3, we'll often see that dismissive avoidants avoid vulnerability. And the way in which they do this is what often feels rejecting. So it can be withholding affection or openness. That act of withholding affection and openness often is registered as a rejection. We're actually going to talk about the neuroscience of how that affects your brain and nervous system in a few minutes as well. So stay tuned for that. But this constant avoidance of vulnerability, somebody can feel like, wait, we're in a relationship together. Like, I'm supposed to be somebody you're vulnerable with. And it can feel kind of confronting and confusing to the person on the receiving end of that as well. Number 4, and this is a huge one, and we're going to talk a lot about this, but if somebody is not present, or if in fact, when there's an important conversation happening, they even become more restless. So a lot of times when somebody is being vulnerable to their dismissive avoidant partner, if that dismissive avoidant has never had a chance to regulate their own nervous system, and co-regulate with others, which is again another feature of what securely attached people do. They're really good at holding space for people's emotions and talking about them, and also asking other people to hold space for their own emotions, right? They're good at co-regulating that way. But because dismissive avoidants aren't modeled that growing up, they may, when somebody else is sharing something important or vulnerable, become less present or actually become quite restless, like have a hard time making eye contact, maybe get up, walk around, decide to like start doing something, some sort of activity while you're talking, or like pick up their phone while you're sharing something. And this can feel so disrespectful if you're on the receiving end of it. And honestly, dismissive avoidants don't even realize that they're doing it the vast majority of their time. And it's so important to have this conversation. Like if this is your friend or your family member or somebody you're dating, you have to say to this person, and we'll talk about exactly how to address this in a little bit here too, but you have to say, hey, I'm sharing something really important with you right now, and I would like for you to be present, or I need you to be present. And, it's because they have this sort of shrunken emotional bandwidth. And so when somebody comes in and tries to like connect with them or share something, and they already feel like they don't have enough bandwidth for themselves or to really do many activities at all with other people, it just feels like their bandwidth goes into like a breaking point. And so they become all sort of nervous and flustered. And that actually is why you'll see from a physiological perspective, they get up, they move around. You can see that they're antsy. It's suddenly like they have ants in their pants when somebody shares something vulnerable. And again, this can be registered as such a big disrespect from the other person. And last but not least, a big theme here is making bids for connection. There was a study done at the Gottman Institute where they talked about the single number one biggest predictor as to whether or not somebody's relationship lasted. And this was in terms of behavior. So this wasn't like these overarching themes like what your attachment style was, but in terms of like relational behaviors. was that when somebody ignored bids for connection. So if somebody was like, hey, honey, how are you? And that person's in the middle of doing something and they don't respond. Or if you're on a walk and you say to your partner, oh, look at the bird outside, and the partner just doesn't answer that because they're in their own world or in their own head, making bids for connection when those bids were not actually registered and reciprocated by the other partner, that was the biggest behavioral predictor as to whether or not a relationship worked out. Before I tell you about what actually happens to your brain in these types of situations and how they affect you, I'm curious to hear from you. Have you ever taken part in any of these behaviors? And if you were in a relationship or were in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant, which behaviors did you see from them and which of these hurt you the most? What were the most difficult ones? Because we're going to go into the neuroscience of how this actually affects you in a moment, and then we're going to talk about how to address this in a healthy way. So how does it affect your brain if you're on the receiving end of this, if you actually are in this position? Well, another study out of the Gottman Institute in the early 1990s showed that stonewalling, one of the first disrespectful behaviors, is actually one of the 4 horsemen that predict divorce. So these studies showed that couples with persistent stonewalling also have significantly higher breakup rates and divorce rates. And that comes back to that study around missed bids for connection, also being a huge predictor as to whether or not a relationship lasts. Naomi Eisenberger in 2003 showed that social rejection in relationships lights up the same brain areas as physical pain, which shows how avoidance actually hurts partners neurologically. In other words, being ignored literally feels like being physically injured in some cases. So I think it's really important to note how this affects your brain. So if you're like, let me just go through this at a high level, I'll give you some tips here now too. The reason I like to really share these things is because I can go into way more detail in the courses than I can in a short YouTube video here. And the courses come with, 2 hours of video content and workbooks and live Q&A support and all these different things. So anyways, if you just want to know some behaviors you can start today, here's the first thing. Number 1, call out the behavior calmly. So when somebody does something, the best way to get heard and to assert yourself is to literally call it out so calmly. So you might say something like, hey, when you go silent, I feel shut out. Okay, so something that's not accusatory, you're stonewalling, you're doing this. Hey, when there's silence between us, I feel shut out. Just really neutral conversations, communication. That's your first go round. If this continues to happen, your second go round is to set an actual boundary around it rather than just to communicate a need. So you might say something like, hey, for me, this stonewalling in a relationship is unacceptable. If you need space or time to process for a minute, that's fine. But let me know that you're going to take space and time, and let me know that you're going to come back and hash it out with me. That's a non-negotiable for me going forward. So you can be really assertive. You can be really direct. You can communicate it. And that gives the person the understanding of the impact that they have, and also that this is a serious thing for you. Number 3, you can model secure communication by expressing your own needs without criticism. We call this positive framing at a high level. Say, I would love for us to have more consistent communication rather than you never consistently communicate. Okay, so you're taking what you need and you're framing it in an exclusively positive way. And here's the last step here. If you are doing these things, if you are modeling healthy communication, you're positively framing, you have communicated your needs in healthy ways, and then you turn them into boundaries if they're not being responded to. At some point, your last step is to go, is this the right relationship for me? Because if somebody is constantly showing up in these ways and they're never trying to make an effort to grow with you, then it may not be a healthy relationship for you going forward. If instead somebody does make the effort, you see the needle move, there's improvements and there's imperfections with those improvements, that's a great space to be patient. If you see somebody communicate much better, 7 out of 8 times, we're really on a right track. If somebody falls off, 1 or 2 times out of 10, let's say even, then have a little bit of grace. 8 out of 10 times, if 80% of the time they're doing better, remind them, see your needs through, allow for the needle to move, allow yourself to grow with this person together. But if the person literally does not try, if there's no openness, there's no communication here, there's no moving of the needle, then you're going to see a point in time where you just have to make a boundary call. Is this time to set a boundary with a person instead of just in the situation itself? That is it for today. I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. I would love to hear from you what patterns you've seen in your relationships, if you've ever seen yourself, take part in any of these patterns as well. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Thanks for watching.